So we see massive drum beating going on for an attack on Iran. And Ray McGovern, former top CIA analyst to Ronald Reagan and George Herbert Walker Bush, said that he believed Cheney was going to stage a Gulf of Tonkin event 3.5 years ago. And it came out 6 months later that he did just that, tried to paint up U.S. patrol boats like Iranian boats to have them attack U.S. ships. So when he talks, I listen. And he said his intel is that they have more than 50-50 chance that they've green-lighted, to a certain extent, an attack to take place against Iran, led by the Israelis, in mid to late August. Well, it's now mid-August. It's now the 16th day of August. And there is a full court press that Iran is about to get nuclear weapons and may use them any minute. It's almost an exact replay, instant replay, of the propaganda that led to the bombardment and the subsequent invasion and the 7-year mass murder and slaughter and wargaming, martial law training that Iraq has been used for, kicking off, of course, in 2003. So we are on the verge of something very, very serious. Iran has 70 million people, not 23 million. They have a lot more high-tech weapons, and they're better organized militarily and historically than Iraq, and will surely block the Strait of Hormuz, bare minimum. The terror attacks that are launched, whether manufactured or real, will be used to clamp down on the global corporate crime syndicates' real enemies, the people of the West. The entire architecture of their attack system is pointed at we the people. They just use outside threats as the smokescreen to launch these expanded takeovers. Iran will build uranium enrichment centers, nuclear chief says. Tehran, CNN, Iran plans to begin construction of 10 uranium enrichment centers across the country by next year. State-run media has quoted Iran's nuclear chief as saying. Continuing, here is an article by Ray McGovern from Consortium News, posted at prisonplanet.com and Infowars.com. Neocons prep U.S. for war with Iran. I guess I was naive in thinking that The Atlantic and its American-Israeli writer, Jeffrey Goldberg, might shy away from arguing for yet another war, this one with Iran, while the cauldrons are still boiling in Afghanistan and Iraq. It's worth remembering how Goldberg helped to make the case for the U.S. invasion of Iraq. For instance, the October 3rd, 2002, as America's war fever was building, Goldberg wrote in Slate, the online magazine, and he was put on all the big news shows, that the Bush administration is planning to launch what many people would undoubtedly call a short-sighted and inexcusable act of aggression. In 5 years, however, I believe that the coming invasion of Iraq will be remembered as an act of profound morality. Looking back on Goldberg's commentaries at the time, it's also a reminder of how many U.S. publications that are considered centrist or even liberal were bending over backwards to get in line with the coming invasion. Even earlier, on March 25th, 2002, Goldberg filed the pages of The New Yorker with a mammoth 17,000-word story hyping Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein's ties to terrorism, including al-Qaeda, which of course was false, and glossing over the ambiguities regarding the gassing of civilians in Kurdish city during the Iran-Iraq war. Goldberg's magnum opus, entitled The Great Terror, earned him high marks from other neocons and essentially made Goldberg's career. The story was also made to order, so to speak, for President George W. Bush and Vice President Dick Cheney. Presenting Goldberg with an award for his article, the Overseas Press Club saw fit to note that the former CIA Director James Woolsey described the story as blockbuster. Woolsey, the self-described anchor of the Presbyterian wing of the JINSA, the Jewish Institute for National Security's Affairs, has been a strong advocate for the use of force against any and all perceived enemies of Israel. Woolsey also was the prime manufacturer and the key disseminator of bogus intelligence on Saddam's al-Qaeda connection. The New Yorker article, while exaggerating Iraq's links to terrorism, Goldberg quotes Woolsey complaining about the CIA's alleged aversion to learning about Saddam's ties to al-Qaeda, because it wasn't true. It is safe bet that Goldberg's prose under the subhead, the Al-Qaeda link, was inspired by Woolsey, but it gets worse. The details in that section came mostly from a drug dealer in a Kurdish prison whom British journalists following up Goldberg's reporting quickly determined to be a, quote, liar. And then he goes on to talk about how Goldberg is now on television and in new articles promoting a new war. It is a lengthy, detailed report breaking down the history of this criminal war they launched 7.5 years ago. And it gets into how they're launching the exact same propaganda, just changing the last letter of Iraq with a Q to Iran with an N. The last part of the story says, pitching for war. Goldberg's mission this time, pitching war with Iran. This time, Goldberg and the Israelis want us to buy into all of their propaganda without a valid major premise. Their argument presupposes that Iran has made the decision to develop nuclear weapons and is hard at work on such a program, which is why they want Americans to believe whether there's evidence or not. The fawning corporate media, FCM, and the neocons who brought us the war in Iraq and, of course, the president himself, speak as though Iran has restarted work on nuclear weapons, part of their nuclear energy program. Then he goes on to document how that is not the case. Now how they've tried to get their uranium enriched outside the country so that it can be proven that it's not weapons grade, how the Russians isn't anywhere near weapons grade, and how they're claiming now that when the Russians deliver this uranium, that they're going to be able to have nuclear weapons, so they've got to launch a new attack now. Joint Chiefs Chairman Admiral Mike Mullen and CENTCOM Commander William Fox Fallon have been living in fear of Cheney-inspired order to commit U.S. forces to war with Iran. Fallon actually had told retired Colonel Patrick Lang a few months before Fallon was removed, "We are not going to do Iran on my watch." Fear? Yes, fear. An altogether sensible reaction. No commander worth his salt looks at the prospect of being brought in to the receiving end of an order that could decimate his troops and lead to a wider war for which his forces would not be adequate. On a moral basis, no commander wants to be faced with the choice between having to resign on principle on the one hand and carrying out an order that he knows to be fatefully misguided on the other. Good sense prevailed over Cheney's strong objections, and Bush sent Mullen to Israel in June 2008 with intentions and instructions to warn the Israelis in no uncertain terms not to provoke war with Iran. And now he goes into how they're rewriting history about what happened, claiming they went to Iraq to bring democracy, not that they went into Iraq lying about WMDs. Now, we've gone over that report. Continuing, here is the report from Kurt Nimmo at Infowars.com. And it has the accompanying video clips in the article. Iran attack this week. Former interim UN ambassador and leading neocon John Bolton went on Fox News on Friday and sounded the alarm bells over Russia's pending delivery of nuclear fuel to Iran's Bushehr reactor. If Israel plans to attack Bushehr, Bolton said, it must act now because allowing the Russians to load nuclear fuel rods at the site will make Iran essentially immune from attack by Israel, because once the rods in the reactor are in place, an attack on the reactor risks spreading radiation in the air and perhaps into the water of the Persian Gulf. The fuel will be loaded on August 21st. This is the start of the physics launch of the reactor, said Sergei Novikov, a spokesman for Rosatom, the Russian energy state nuclear corporation. From that moment, the Bushehr plant will be officially considered a nuclear energy installation. Russia is currently operating under a $1 billion contract with Iran and has worked for over a decade on the reactor that, I would add, is peaceful. Scrolling up on the article, you can see the Fox News propaganda piece where they are preparing the public for this new war. As a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, Iran has the right to build nuclear reactors for its civil energy needs. By the way, they import around just about half their gasoline because they don't have the refineries. They're too expensive. They have lots of oil, but not enough refineries. And so they need this power for electricity. They're not allowed to have it. Iran has long claimed its nuclear program is for peaceful power-generated purposes and would help free up oil and gas resources for export, thus generating additional hard currency revenues. Bolton and the neocons refuse to accept that the facility will produce nuclear energy and insist it will be used to create nuclear weapons. According to Bolton, once the reactor is operational, it is only a matter of time before it begins producing plutonium that could be used in a nuclear weapon. And, to quote him, in the normal operation of the reactor, in just a short period of time, you could get substantial amounts of plutonium to use as nuclear weapons, Bolton told Fox. So they are talking about needing to strike Iran in the next 6 to 7 days before they load the fuel rods, because if you bomb an active nuclear site, it will create something bigger than Chernobyl and rain down radiation all over Asia. We are back live. Again, thank you for joining us on this live Monday edition. We will talk more later in the broadcast about the situation with Iran. But I did want to get into a press release put out by Harvard University. Harvard University Fund sells all Israeli holdings. Any holdings, any investments in Israeli-based companies, Harvard has sold them and is moving more into communist Chinese holdings. All these major universities, just like other quasi-governmental institutions, like the University of Texas at Austin, have tens of billions of dollars of investments. And a lot of these investments, of course, they were pushed into buying by Bernie Madoff and others. But in another blow to Israeli shares, the Harvard Management Company notified the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, on Friday that it had sold all its holdings in Israeli companies during the second quarter of 2010. What's going to happen to Israeli companies if World War III starts in the Middle East with Iran? No reason for the sale was mentioned. The Harvard Management Company manages Harvard University's endowment. Harvard Management Company stated that it's in its 13F form that it sold 483,590 shares in Teva Pharmacological Industries, Ltd., Nice Systems, Checkpoint Software Technologies, Partner Communications, Celicom Israeli, and a whole bunch of other companies. Harvard Management Company, 13F form, shows some investing trends in its largest holdings, each worth $295 million, or iShares, ETFs, one with Chinese equities and the other on emerging markets. Harvard also owns $181 million in Brazilian ETF. So that's some of the other foreign holdings. They have billions and billions in their endowment. Last time I checked UT, it was over $50 billion in their endowment. But they're raising the tuition cost and raising parking fees and raising the dorm cost. All these major universities are. And you go get a $100,000 degree, and then it's near worthless for you. So we'll be talking more about that. But why would Harvard and many other institutions be completely divesting in Israel? Well, because a full-out war in the Middle East, Israel is sure to be attacked by Syria, by Lebanon, and by other countries in the region as part of a large war. And even if Israel comes out victorious using their nuclear weapons, it is going to destroy much of the industry and tourism in that region. But Obama and the globalists, to get their world government established, need this political smokescreen. Because in Israel and the United States and England, if we're in a major war, most people will still rally around the government as if it is the flag, as if it is the country, as if that is what is patriotic when our governments have been seized by criminal interest. And what did Robert Shapiro and many others say in the last month in the Times of London and other publications, including the Financial Times and Associated Press? They said Obama needs a new Oklahoma City or 9/11 event so that he can look strong and have a political distraction going into the November elections. And his approval rating continues to plunge every week.